Initially the product of the new cotton industry, the factory became the chief means of organizing labor for these new industrial machines. This is all part of the Industrial Revolution. We're going to be examining these early places of work and focusing on England here. The industrial factory, well, these industrial factories, you see the workplace, it's shifting from the artisan shop or the peasant's cottage. It's moving to these factories, or what was referred to as in the early 8 years of the Industrial Revolution as places of work. Employers hired workers who no longer owned the means of production. They no longer own these spinning wheels or hand looms. It's the factory owners that own these very big, complicated industrial machines. And the workers are simply paid wages to run these machines. And from the very beginning, the factory system, it demands a new type of discipline from its employees. Factory owners, they couldn't afford to allow this expensive machinery to stand idle, so the workers are going to be forced to work regular hours and in shifts, and this is to keep the machines producing at a steady pace for maximum output. And for these early factory laborers, this is going to represent a massive adjustment for them. Pre-industrial workers, they weren't accustomed to a timed format. Agricultural laborers had always kept irregular hours. You had hectic work at harvest time, and that might be followed by periods of inactivity. And even with the cottage industry, weavers and spinners, they would work at home, and they would fulfill their weekly quotas by working around the clock for 2 or 3 days. And then for the rest of the week, they would, just kind of relax. There was more of a leisurely pace. Factory owners, they are faced with a formidable task. They had to create a system of time, work, discipline that would accustom employees to working regular, unvarying hours during which they performed a set number of tasks over and over again as efficiently as possible. Such work, of course, tended to be repetitive and boring, and factory owners resorted to tough methods to accomplish their goals. So they're going to develop factory rules, factory regulations, and they are minute and detailed. Adult workers were fined for a wide variety of minor infractions, such as being a few minutes late for work. They would be dismissed for more serious misdoings, especially drunkenness. Employers found that dismissals and fines that worked well for adult employees, but for children, they're less likely to understand the implications of fines, that concept of money. They didn't understand the implications of dismissal, so they were sometimes disciplined more directly, frequently by beating. And this all seems to work. As the 19th century progressed, the second and third generation of workers, they came to view regular working week as a natural way of life. And of course, that's an attitude that made Britain's incredible economic growth a reality in that century. Working conditions in the new industrial factories, just like their living conditions, were wretched. In the early decades of the Industrial Revolution, these places of work hours ranged from 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. They'd have a half hour for lunch, another half hour for dinner. There's no security of employment, there's no minimum wage, and the worst conditions were in the cotton mills. Temperatures could be debilitating in the cotton mills. One report noted that, quote, in the cotton spinning work, these creatures are kept 14 hours each day, locked up summer and winter in a heat of 8 to 84 degrees, end quote. Mills are also dirty, dusty, and unhealthy, and they're forced to eat their lunch in there too. So, of course, their food is also getting all this dirt. And also in the cotton mills, it was just this um, continual. You see cotton lint, fabric, particularly the yarn, is just constantly floating in the air. So the workers are also breathing that in, and some of them it causes some lung problems. Some more Advanced thinking factory owners, they put in what they call blowers into their factories. They're huge fans, and they would try to pull out some of that cotton fluff that's floating around, because they realize that a healthy workforce is going to be more productive. Um, uh, in the cotton, in the factories, as well as the coal mines, both children and women are employed in large numbers. Children, they were an important part of the family economy, even in pre-industrial times. They're working in the fields as agricultural workers. In the cottage industry, they were carding and spinning wool at home, helping out the family. They contributed to the family income. And child labor is going to be exploited more than ever in the factory owners. The owners of the cotton factories, they appreciated certain features of child labor, um, and their small size. It made it easier for them to crawl under the machines to gather loose cotton. And children are also more easily broken to factory work, especially since these factory managers can beat them. Now think about it, if any of you have children, or when you were in kindergarten and very young, kids after lunch just kind of conk out. And that's the same thing going on in those factories. Lots of times the children were beaten for falling asleep at work. Their metabolism just couldn't keep up. But children, above all, they represented a cheap supply of labor. In 1821, 40% of the British people, they're under the age of 20. So children made up a particularly abundant supply of labor, and they're paid only 1/6 or 1/3 of what a man was paid. In the cotton factories in 1838, children under 18, they made up 29% of the total workforce. And children, they worked as young as 6 or 7 years old. They too worked 12 to 15 hours a day, 6 days a week in the cotton mills. And the workers, women too, are also working in the cotton textile factories as well as the coal mines. Many women in the working class, they had to work. They had to supplement the family income. Maybe their husband was injured in an industrial accident, or he was killed, or maybe he just ran off, or maybe they're single women and they need to support themselves. So women also were an important part of the labor force, and they were also not paid as much as men as well. Workers do try to change the working conditions. They began to look to form labor organizations to gain decent wages and working conditions. One individual by the name of Robert Owen, Owen actually became rich. He was a cotton magnate, but he was a social reformer as well. And Owen, under his direction, he organized a Grand National Consolidated Trades Union that was formed in February of 1834. It was to be a national federation of trade unions, and the primary purpose was to coordinate a general strike for an 8-hour working day. Unfortunately, though, it kind of just played itself out. Not very successful because the workers just didn't back it up. He's advocating an 8-hour working day, but the workers wanted to work those additional hours and get paid for it. So it just kind of fell apart. The Luddites, another type of collective action taken by workers in the early decades of the Industrial Revolution, were the Luddites. These were skilled craftspeople. They were in the Midlands and northern England, and in 1812, they attacked the machines in these factories. They believed that the machines threatened their livelihoods. Of course, those attacks failed to stop the industrial mechanization of Britain. And, it's kind of naive thinking if they destroy the machines that it's just going to go away. But the Brits scared the bejesus out of the British government. They sent in 12,000 troops to find the vandals, and no one snitched on them. Nobody. The local support they received, that was very evident when no one was arrested and charged with vandalism. A much more meaningful expression of the attempts of the British workers to improve their conditions developed in a movement known as Chartism. It's the first important political movement of working men organized during the 19th century. The aim was to achieve political democracy. People's Charter was drawn up in 1838. It demanded universal male suffrage, demanded payment for members of parliament, and that means then that anyone then could run for office and sit as a member of parliament. Um, it also wanted annual sessions of parliament, and petitions were passed around all across the country. And the Chartists, they presented to Parliament in 1839 and in 1842 these petitions with millions of signatures, but the members of Parliament, they were not ready for political democracy, and those petitions were rejected. After 1843, Chartism as a movement, it had really largely played itself out, but it never really posed a threat to the British establishment. But it's not a total failure. Its true significance, Chartism, it stemmed from its ability to arouse and organize millions of working class men and women, gave them a sense of working class consciousness that they had not really possessed before. And it also gave them a political education. And that's going to be important because ultimately all the points of the People's Charter will be accepted, but it's not going to be until later on in the future. Efforts at change by reformers in the government. You see middle-class reformers getting involved, and what fuels this is child labor. So they're trying to improve the worst conditions in the industrial factory system, and it's coming from outside the ranks of the working classes. And from the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it had drawn criticism. You had reform-minded individuals. Some of them were factory owners. They may be feeling twinges of conscience because they got wealthy off the labors of the working class. Some may be social reformers, and some may be members of parliament. They're campaigning against the evils of the industrial factory, especially condemning what they called the abuse of children. And it became also apparent that the increase in wealth generated by the Industrial Revolution, it was accompanied by an ever-increasing number of poor people. And more efforts are made to document and deal with these problems. So you're having reports from civic-minded citizens and parliamentary commissions, and intensified and demonstrated the extent of poverty, degradation, and suffering. So the reform efforts began to succeed. The first success was a series of factory acts. They're collectively known as the Factory Acts. They're passed between 1802 and 1819. And it limited labor for children between the ages of 9 and 16 to 12 hours a day. It also limited the employment of children under 9 years old. I shouldn't say limited, it forbidden from them hiring children under 9 years of age. Also, the law stipulated that children are to receive instruction in reading and arithmetic during working hours. But these acts, these early factory acts, they only applied to cotton mills, not to the other factories or mines where some of the worst abuses were taking place. Just as important, no provisions were made for enforcing the acts through a system of inspection. So there's nothing really there to compel the factory owners to abide by these rules because there was no fines instituted, and nothing was in place. So in the 1830s and 1840s, new legislation is going to be passed to strengthen the earlier labor legislation, like the Factory Act of 1833. And with this, all textile factories are now included. So it's not just limited to just cotton mills. Children between 9 and 13 could work only 8 hours a day. Those between 13 and 18, 12 hours a day. And this time, factory inspectors were appointed, and they had the power to fine those who broke the law. Also, it made sure that the factory owners were providing some sort of education for these children. Factory owners, they resisted that because taking those 2 hours away, that they believed would cost them money. They would lose profit. Profit was the all-important thing for these factory owners. So also strengthening legislation, and again, this is efforts at change by reformers and government. Um, the 10 Hours Act, this is going to reduce the workday for children between 13 and 18 now to 10 hours. And with the Factory Act, women for the first time are included in this. Um, and then you see with the Coal Mines Act in 1842, boys were an important part of the labor force in the coal mines. And now they are not even allowed to work in the mines. And women are also excluded from working in the mines as well. There was some real controversy about women working in these industrial jobs. They believed that physically women were not up to it, and that the women's place was in the home. Women's job was to have a family, have children, take care of the home. But a lot of women, they didn't have a choice. They had to work. Um, so eventually, men too are going to benefit from the move to restrict factory hours, but this all starts with child labor, and then eventually women are included, and then finally men will be included in the reduction of the number of hours. And eventually then governments will start passing laws for safety issues in the factories, and eliminating child labor totally. The United States actually doesn't pass any meaningful child labor laws until 1933. And that's because we're in the Depression. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt finally gets some legislation passed to eliminate child labor, but it's to open up jobs for the unemployed men.